History celebrates the conquerors, the generals, the kings who built empires with their bare hands and iron will. We memorialize their victories, study their strategies, build monuments to their genius. But what about the man who stands closest to power? The trusted advisor who whispers in the king's ear, who knows every secret, every weakness, every fear. What happens when that man decides the empire would be better off without its emperor? This is the story of Mbopha KaSithayi, the man who stood closer to Shaka Zulu than any person alive, and the man who drove a spear through his king's heart. He was the emperor's most trusted advisor, his personal servant, his confidant for over a decade. Yet on September 22, 1828, Mbopha orchestrated the assassination that ended the reign of Africa's most feared military genius. He didn't kill Shaka for personal glory. He didn't act out of revenge. He committed regicide to save the very empire Shaka had built. Think about that paradox for a moment. The loyal servant who becomes the ultimate betrayer. The man who serves his king's breakfast and then plans his funeral. How does someone make that impossible choice? What transforms devotion into deadly calculation? Here's what makes this story even more shocking. Mbopha succeeded where dozens of Shaka's enemies had failed. Rival chiefs, neighboring kingdoms, internal rebels. They all tried to bring down the Zulu colossus and died in the attempt. But Mbopha understood something they didn't. You don't defeat a king on the battlefield. You defeat him in his own house, with people he trusts, in the moment he least expects it. The stakes couldn't have been higher. In 1828, the Zulu Empire stretched across 11,500 square miles of southern Africa. Shaka's armies had conquered hundreds of chiefdoms, transforming scattered clans into history's most disciplined military force. His innovations in warfare, the short stabbing spear, the buffalo horn formation, total warfare tactics, had made the Zulu name synonymous with terror. But that same military genius was driving the empire toward collapse. Shaka's grief over his mother's death had transformed him from a brilliant but ruthless leader into something far more dangerous, an unpredictable tyrant who executed subjects for insufficient mourning, who sent warriors on suicidal campaigns, who seemed to value death over life. The question facing Mbopha and a small circle of conspirators was existential. Could the Zulu nation survive its greatest king? Picture yourself in Mbopha's position. You've served Shaka since before the empire existed, when he was just an exiled prince with nothing but ambition and rage. You've watched him transform from outcast to conqueror, from refugee to emperor. You've witnessed his military genius firsthand, seen him reshape warfare itself, but you've also seen him descend into madness, watched the death toll mount, felt the empire begin to crack under the weight of his grief and paranoia. What would you do? Remain loyal to the man who gave you power and position, or betray him to save the nation he created? This choice, this impossible moral dilemma, is where our story begins. Not on a battlefield or in a throne room, but in the mind of a servant who understood that sometimes loyalty demands the ultimate betrayal. To understand how Mbopha reached his decision, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to when Shaka was nobody, and the Zulu were just another small clan fighting for survival in the brutal politics of southern Africa. The year is 1816. The land that will become the Zulu Empire is a patchwork of competing chiefdoms, each fighting for cattle, territory, and survival. In this world of constant warfare, a young warrior named Shaka returns to his father's clan after years of exile. He's 29 years old, battle-hardened from service in the army of paramount chief Dingiswayo, and burning with humiliation from a childhood spent as an outcast, mocked for being born from an unsanctioned relationship, rejected by his father, driven away with his mother. This is where Mbopha enters history, though the exact details of their first meeting are lost to time. What we know is this: Mbopha KaSithayi came from the Sithayi clan, likely a minor but respected lineage within the broader Zulu community. He wasn't royalty. He wasn't a famous warrior. He was, by all accounts, intelligent, observant, and absolutely loyal. These qualities caught Shaka's attention. In those early days, Shaka needed people he could trust absolutely. His half-brothers, legitimate sons of his father, Chief Senzangakona, resented this exiled son who'd returned with revolutionary military ideas and dangerous ambitions. The traditional power structure viewed him with suspicion, but Shaka had learned something crucial during his exile. Personal loyalty, carefully cultivated, could be more powerful than blood ties or traditional authority. Mbopha became part of Shaka's inner circle, that small group of men who would help transform a minor chiefdom of perhaps 150 people into an empire. His role evolved into something unprecedented in Zulu society. The personal attendant to the paramount chief, a position that combined servant, bodyguard, advisor, and spy. He would serve Shaka's meals, attend to his household, but also listen to conversations, report on potential threats, and help manage the complex web of relationships that held the growing empire together. Watch what happens next, because it reveals Shaka's genius and the foundation of his power. When Chief Senzangakona dies in 1816, Shaka doesn't immediately seize power. Instead, he supports his half-brother Sigujana's brief reign, then allegedly arranges his assassination. Within months, Shaka is chief of the Zulu, and he immediately begins his revolution. First comes military innovation. Shaka replaces the traditional long-throwing spear with the ikalwa, a short stabbing weapon designed for close combat. He develops the bull's horns formation, a center that fixes the enemy in place while flanks encircle and destroy them. He institutes brutal training regimens, transforming warriors from part-time fighters into professional soldiers. Most revolutionary of all, he eliminates the traditional ritual combat, where armies would throw spears at each other until one side retreated, and replaces it with total warfare. Victory now meant complete annihilation of enemy forces. Mbopha witnesses all of this from the closest possible vantage point. He sees how Shaka thinks, how he plans, how he manipulates people and situations. He watches as Shaka uses a combination of military brilliance and psychological warfare to absorb neighboring clans. Some join willingly, awed by Zulu military power. Others are conquered and integrated. The pattern is consistent. Defeat your enemies completely, then offer survivors a choice. Join the Zulu nation and prosper, or resist and die. The empire grows at a staggering pace. By 1818, just 2 years after Shaka takes power, the Zulu have absorbed dozens of chiefdoms. The army numbers around 2,000 warriors. By 1820, it's 4,000. The expansion creates ripples across southern Africa. Rival chiefs flee with their people, triggering a period of massive migration and warfare known as the Mbopha, or the crushing. Historians estimate that between 1 and 2 million people died during this period of upheaval, though the exact causes and Shaka's direct responsibility remain subjects of intense debate. For Mbopha, these years represent a transformation as dramatic as the empire's. He goes from servant to a minor chief to one of the most powerful men in the Zulu nation. He's present at war councils where strategy is debated. He manages access to Shaka, controlling who gets to speak with the paramount chief. He becomes wealthy, acquiring cattle and multiple wives, the traditional markers of status in Zulu society. Most importantly, he becomes indispensable. But he also sees something else: the cost of empire building. Shaka's military system depends on young men serving in age-based regiments, forbidden to marry until their regiment is washed in blood, meaning they've achieved significant military victories. This creates an army of young warriors desperate to prove themselves, eager for warfare, sexually frustrated, and absolutely loyal to the king, who will eventually grant them permission to marry and establish homesteads. It's brilliant social engineering. It's also unsustainable. Mbopha watches as Shaka becomes more isolated, more paranoid about potential challengers. The king who once walked among his warriors now surrounds himself with a personal guard. He executes people for minor infractions, real or imagined. Traditional counselors find themselves sidelined or eliminated if they question his decisions. The inner circle grows smaller and more fearful. Yet through it all, Mbopha remains loyal. Why? Perhaps he believes in Shaka's vision of Zulu supremacy. Perhaps he's simply too invested in the system to imagine an alternative. Or perhaps he understands that questioning Shaka is suicide, and survival requires absolute obedience. Whatever his motivations, Mbopha's loyalty during these years is unquestioned. When Shaka needs something done discreetly, Mbopha handles it. When potential rebels need monitoring, Mbopha watches them. When the king needs counsel, Mbopha is there. By 1824, the Zulu Empire dominates the region. British traders at Port Natal, modern Durban, send reports back to the Cape describing Shaka as a Black Napoleon, a military genius who has created order from chaos. The reality is more complex. Shaka has indeed built something unprecedented. A centralized state with a professional army, diplomatic protocols, and efficient administration. But he's built it on a foundation of constant warfare, strict social control, and absolute authority. Then comes 1827, and everything changes. Shaka's mother, Nandi, dies. To understand what happens next, you need to understand what Nandi represented. She was the woman who raised Shaka during his exile, who endured mockery and hardship alongside him, who never stopped believing in his destiny. When Shaka honored her as Great She-Elephant, he wasn't just showing filial devotion. He was rewriting history, transforming his mother from a woman of questionable status into the mother of an emperor. Her death destroys something in Shaka. He declares a year of mourning. Not ceremonial mourning, absolute, enforced, violent mourning. Thousands are executed for insufficient grief. Pregnant women are killed, along with their husbands, supposedly because new life during mourning is disrespectful. Agricultural work is forbidden. The use of milk, a Zulu staple, is prohibited for months. Warriors are sent on campaigns designed to spread Zulu grief through conquering enemies, but which really amount to suicide missions. Mbopha watches this descent into madness from his position at Shaka's side. He sees the executions, hears the king's increasingly erratic commands, feels the empire beginning to fracture. The warriors are exhausted and demoralized. The civilian population is terrified. Food security is threatened, and Shaka shows no signs of returning to rationality. This is the moment when loyalty becomes complicated. This is when the question forms in Mbopha's mind. What do you do when the king you serve is destroying the empire you helped build? The aftermath of Nandi's death reveals something Mbopha has perhaps always known, but never acknowledged. Shaka values death more than life. The campaigns following the mourning period aren't strategic. They're expressions of rage and grief. Warriors march hundreds of miles to attack distant enemies who pose no threat to the Zulu. They return exhausted, having lost men not to battle, but to starvation and disease during long marches. Traditional military discipline begins to crack. Regiments that once would fight to the last man now show signs of demoralization. Some warriors begin to desert, risking execution rather than facing another suicidal campaign. The older commanders, men who fought alongside Shaka in the early days, start to question whether their king has lost his mind. But questioning Shaka is lethal. He executes commanders who suggest caution. He kills anyone who appears to mourn insufficiently or excessively. The criteria for execution become increasingly arbitrary. Mbopha watches as people he's known for years disappear, their bodies left for hyenas, their families erased from memory. The atmosphere around Shaka becomes toxic with fear. Yet Mbopha survives by being perfectly attuned to Shaka's moods, by knowing exactly what to say and when to say nothing. This is his special skill, reading the most dangerous man in southern Africa, anticipating his needs before Shaka himself knows them. But this constant vigilance takes its toll. You can't spend every waking moment managing a paranoid tyrant without starting to think about alternatives. Enter Shaka's half-brothers, Dingane and Mhlangana. These men have their own grievances. They're legitimate sons of Senzangakona, yet they've been overshadowed by their exile-returned brother. They've served in Shaka's armies, helped build his empire, but they've never received the recognition they believe they deserve. More importantly, they've watched Shaka eliminate other potential rivals, their half-brother Sigujana, various cousins, and ambitious commanders. They know that in Shaka's court, being a potential alternative to the king is a death sentence waiting to happen. The conspiracy begins with careful, indirect conversations, not about killing Shaka, that's too dangerous to speak aloud, but about the empire's problems, the king's erratic behavior, the unsustainability of constant warfare. These conversations happen in 1828, likely during the preparation for another military campaign, this one against the Mpondo people hundreds of miles to the south. Mbopha's exact role in the conspiracy's formation remains historically murky, but his participation was essential. Without him, any assassination attempt would fail. Shaka trusted Mbopha with his life, literally. The king's sleeping quarters, his daily routines, his moments of vulnerability. Mbopha controlled access to all of it. No one could get close enough to kill Shaka without Mbopha's cooperation. The conspiracy forms slowly, carefully. Dingane and Mhlangana sound out other potential allies. Mbopha, sometimes confused with Mbopha in historical accounts, another servant, trusted warriors who are exhausted with Shaka's leadership, and crucially, some of the older commanders who remember what the empire was like before Nandi's death. But here's what makes this conspiracy different from typical power struggles. It's not purely about personal ambition. Yes, Dingane and Mhlangana want power, but they also represent a genuine alternative vision for the empire, one that maintains Zulu military strength while pulling back from the brink of societal collapse. They promise to allow warriors to marry, to reduce the pace of campaigns, to restore some traditional governance structures that Shaka had dismantled. For Mbopha, this creates a new kind of moral calculation. Killing Shaka is treason, the ultimate betrayal of the man he served for over a decade. But allowing Shaka to continue could destroy the empire. It's the choice between personal loyalty and loyalty to something larger, between the man and the nation, between the king who gave him everything and the future survival of the Zulu people. Imagine making that choice. You're in your position because of this man's trust. You've benefited from his success. You've helped him build this empire, but you've also seen him descend into tyranny, watched the death toll mount, felt the foundation cracking. What do you do? The conspirators plan carefully. The assassination must appear to have broad support, or it will trigger a civil war that tears the empire apart. They need the army to accept the transition, which means timing the killing for when the bulk of the military is away on campaign. They need to eliminate Shaka quickly and decisively, then present the succession as inevitable and legitimate. The opportunity comes in September 1828. Shaka sends a massive force south toward Mpondo territory, supposedly to punish them for some offense. The real motive is less clear. Perhaps Shaka genuinely believes in the campaign's strategic value, or perhaps it's another attempt to process his grief through violence. Regardless, the army marches out, leaving Shaka at his kraal, royal homestead, at Dukuza, with only a minimal guard. the stage is set. The army is gone. The most powerful man in southern Africa is as vulnerable as he'll ever be. Now comes the hardest part: actually committing regicide. Historical accounts of the days leading up to the assassination suggest that Shaka knew something was wrong. He'd survived multiple assassination attempts before. He understood conspiracy. But he trusted Mbopha absolutely. That trust was his fatal mistake. On September 22, 1828, everything converges. The exact sequence of events varies across different historical accounts, but the core facts are consistent. Shaka is at Dukuza, conducting routine business. Dingane and Mhlangana arrive with some warriors, ostensibly to discuss matters related to the army or administration. Nothing seems unusual. The king's half-brothers visit regularly. Mbopha ensures that Shaka is isolated. He manages the household routines to create a moment when the king is vulnerable. Some accounts suggest Shaka was sitting in an open area, engaged in conversation. Others place him in a more private setting. What matters is that Mbopha created the opportunity. Then it happens. Dingane and Mhlangana, along with a servant named Mbopha, attack Shaka with spears. The first thrust strikes the king, who reportedly cries out in shock more than pain. The man who had survived countless battles, who had personally killed enemy warriors in close combat, who had transformed himself from outcast to emperor, he's being murdered by his own half-brothers. Where is Mbopha during the attack? Historical sources differ. Some suggest he participated directly. Others indicate he held back the guards, or ensured no one interfered. His exact actions matter less than his role. Without Mbopha's cooperation, the assassination would have been impossible. Shaka's final words, according to Zulu oral tradition, were directed at his killers. "Are you stabbing me, kings of the earth? You will come to an end by killing one another." It's a prophecy that would prove eerily accurate, as Dingane would later kill Mhlangana and rule until he himself was overthrown. But there's another version of Shaka's last words, one that suggests he understood the larger betrayal. "Brothers, why do you kill me? Not anger, not threats, just a question that captures the heartbreaking simplicity of betrayal by those closest to you." The killing is quick. Shaka dies rapidly, his blood soaking into the ground at Dukuza. The conspirators immediately send word to the army, not asking for permission, but presenting a fait accompli. Shaka is dead. Dingane is now paramount chief. The transition is complete. Mbopha's role in the assassination makes him indispensable to the new regime, and extraordinarily dangerous. He knows too much. He was too close to Shaka. He facilitated regicide. Dingane needs Mbopha's support to legitimize the succession. But every day Mbopha lives is a reminder of how vulnerable leaders are to their closest advisors. Initially, Dingane rewards the conspirators. Mbopha maintains his position and receives additional cattle and recognition. The new king makes concessions the warriors desperately wanted: permission for regiments to marry, reduced campaign tempo, restoration of some traditional governance councils. In these first weeks, it appears the conspiracy succeeded beyond what anyone hoped. The empire stabilizes. The warriors accept the new leadership. Life in the Zulu nation returns to something approaching normalcy. But paranoia is contagious, and Dingane learned from Shaka that absolute power requires eliminating potential threats. Within months, the purge begins. Mhlangana, Dingane's co-conspirator and brother, is the first to die. Dingane accuses him of plotting another coup and has him executed. It's the first indication that the new regime will be just as ruthless as Shaka's, just more calculating about it. Then Dingane turns his attention to Mbopha. The timing varies in different accounts, but most sources agree that within a year of Shaka's death, Dingane orders Mbopha's execution. The official reason changes depending on the source. Some say Mbopha was accused of practicing witchcraft, others that he was plotting against Dingane, still others that no reason was given at all. The reality is simpler and more brutal. Mbopha knew where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. He had facilitated one assassination. Who's to say he wouldn't facilitate another? In Dingane's calculation, Mbopha's usefulness couldn't outweigh his danger. Imagine Mbopha's last moments. The man who stood at the center of Zulu power for over a decade, who helped build an empire, who made the impossible choice to kill his king to save his nation, he's being executed by the very people he put in power. There's no trial, no defense, no appeal to past loyalty. Just death, swift and final. Did Mbopha regret his choice? We'll never know. Perhaps he understood that his death was inevitable the moment he agreed to the conspiracy. Perhaps he believed sacrificing himself was worth it if the Zulu nation survived. Or perhaps, in those final moments, he simply realized that proximity to power always extracts its price. His execution sends a clear message to the Zulu elite. The new regime will tolerate no challenges, no reminders of how it came to power. No one who knows too many secrets. The other minor conspirators meet similar fates or flee the kingdom. Within 2 years of Shaka's death, almost everyone directly involved in the assassination is dead or gone, but the empire survives. Dingane's reign lasts until 1840, 12 years of relative stability compared to Shaka's final year of chaos. The military reforms continue, the administrative structures Shaka created remain intact, and the Zulu nation maintains its regional dominance. In this sense, the conspiracy achieved its goal. The empire was saved by removing the king. Yet the cost is staggering. Shaka is dead, his vision of Zulu supremacy permanently altered. Mhlangana is dead, killed by his co-conspirator brother. Mbopha is dead, executed by the regime he helped install. And dozens of minor players in the conspiracy are dead or exiled, their involvement in Shaka's death marking them for elimination. The tragedy multiplies when you consider what happens next. Dingane's rule, while more stable, lacks Shaka's military genius. When British settlers expand from the Cape and Boer Voortrekkers arrive in Natal, the Zulu face new challenges. Dingane's attempt to manage these threats through a combination of diplomacy and violence fails catastrophically. His treacherous killing of Boer leader Piet Retief and subsequent defeat at the Battle of Blood River, 1838, begins the Zulu Empire's long decline. Would Shaka have handled the European threat better? Impossible to say. But the question haunts any analysis of the assassination. The conspirators killed Shaka to save the empire from his tyranny, only to watch that empire slowly fragment under less capable leadership. The irony is bitter. They saved the Zulu nation from Shaka's madness, but in doing so, they removed the one leader with the military brilliance to face the coming European challenge. Mbopha KaSithayi's name is largely forgotten outside academic circles studying Zulu history. No monuments commemorate him. No praise songs celebrate his service. In the vast literature about Shaka Zulu, Mbopha appears as a footnote, the treacherous servant who betrayed his king. But this simplistic narrative misses something crucial about power, loyalty, and moral complexity. Mbopha faced an impossible choice: remain loyal to a man descending into tyranny, or betray him to save the nation he'd built. He chose betrayal and paid for it with his life. Was he a traitor or a patriot? A villain or a tragic hero? The answer depends on your perspective. From Shaka's viewpoint, Mbopha is the ultimate Judas figure, the trusted confidant who facilitated murder. From the Zulu people's perspective, especially those who survived the post-Nandi chaos, Mbopha might be the man who ended a reign of terror. From a modern ethical standpoint, he's something more complex, a person who made a calculated decision that murder was preferable to allowing systematic destruction to continue. Consider the broader historical implications. Mbopha's story challenges our romantic narratives about loyalty and leadership. We want to believe that great leaders inspire unshakable loyalty, that true servants remain faithful even when their masters are wrong. But what if loyalty to a person conflicts with loyalty to a principle or a people? What if the leader's judgment is compromised? What if staying loyal means becoming complicit in atrocities? These questions remain relevant today. Throughout history, from ancient Rome to modern dictatorships, trusted advisors have faced Mbopha's dilemma: participate in removing a leader or watch everything collapse. Some choose loyalty and become accomplices to disaster. Others choose betrayal and sometimes save their nations. All pay a price. Mbopha's execution by Dingane reveals another uncomfortable truth. Revolutionary regimes devour their own. The conspirators who removed Shaka couldn't coexist with the memory of their act. They had to eliminate everyone who knew how vulnerable they really were, how contingent their power was, how they achieved their positions through murder rather than legitimacy. This pattern repeats across history. From the French Revolution to the Russian Revolution to countless coups and counter-coups. The Zulu Empire's story doesn't end with Mbopha or even Dingane. It continues through further conflicts, both internal and external, until the final defeat by the British in 1879. The kingdom Shaka built, that Mbopha helped preserve through assassination, lasted about 70 years as a major power. In the long sweep of history, that's a brief moment. Yet the impact persists. The Zulu nation survives today as a cultural and political identity within South Africa. Shaka's military innovations influenced warfare across the continent. The language, traditions, and pride of the Zulu people endure. In this sense, Mbopha succeeded. The empire he helped save through regicide survived long enough to become something more than one man's creation. It became a nation with its own identity, independent of any single leader. That transformation, from a personal empire built on Shaka's genius to an enduring people, might be Mbopha's true legacy, even if history has forgotten his name. So what's the lesson here? Perhaps it's that loyalty is more complicated than we pretend, that sometimes the most loyal act is betrayal, that great leaders can become great threats, that power isolates and corrupts, that the price of empire is measured not just in conquered territories, but in moral compromises and impossible choices. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler and darker, that proximity to power is dangerous, that trusted advisors are always expendable, that facilitating a coup makes you a threat to the regime you helped install. Mbopha stood at the center of power and died because of it. He served his king faithfully until he didn't. He helped save the empire and was killed for his trouble. History is full of Mbophas, servants who became assassins, advisors who became conspirators, loyalists who made the terrible calculation that killing their leader was the only way to save their nation. Most of them die, most of them are forgotten, but they remind us that history isn't made just by the kings and generals whose names we remember. It's also made by the people standing next to them, the ones who watch, who serve, who judge, and sometimes who act. What would you have done in Mbopha's position? Would you have remained loyal to Shaka and watched the empire collapse? Would you have joined the conspiracy and lived with regicide's weight? Would you have fled and abandoned your people to their fate? These aren't hypothetical questions. Throughout history and around the world today, people face versions of Mbopha's dilemma. Stand by your leader or stand up for your principles. The fact that we still ask these questions, still struggle with these choices, proves that Mbopha's story isn't just about the Zulu Empire in 1828. It's about the eternal tension between personal loyalty and moral duty, between obedience and conscience, between serving power and serving something greater than power. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, consider what other forgotten figures of history might have faced similar impossible choices. Who else made decisions that changed the course of nations while remaining footnotes in history books? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear about other historical figures whose moral complexity challenges our simple narratives about heroes and villains. And if you want to explore more untold stories from African history, stories that challenge what you thought you knew about power, empire, and leadership, hit that subscribe button. Because history isn't just about remembering the famous. It's about understanding the complex, flawed humans who shaped our world, one impossible choice at a time.